Hello, everyone, and a very warm welcome. My name is Carolyn Kassan. I'm the Assistant Dean here at the Center for Global Affairs. And those of you that may be new to the CGA, we host two master's programs, an MS in Global Affairs and an MS in Global Security, Conflict, and Cybercrime, and also have a robust continuing education program, and we do public events. And really just so thrilled to be partnering today with the Carnegie Council. And I also want to extend a very happy Global Ethics Day to everyone here today and those who are joining us virtually from around the world. And I know that Joel will be telling us where a lot of viewing parties are happening actually for this special event. And I just want to extend sincere gratitude. The team here at NYU, we are delighted to partner with Carnegie Council for Ethics and International Affairs to help celebrate this very important and special day. Each year on Global Ethics Day, Carnegie Council calls upon schools, organizations, and individuals from around the world to take action to empower ethics, so that together we can raise awareness and work toward addressing the most critical issues facing society. And as all of us here today know, we have a number of critical issues that are facing society today. We often think about ethics in a philosophical, academic, or even abstract way. However, ethics is much more than that. It is an active process that each of us can engage in to improve our lives, strengthen our communities, and to build a better world. And it is within that framework that we have organized today's discussion, which will focus on how each of us can use ethics to improve our daily lives, the power of humor as a force for good, and perhaps most importantly, how collective ethical action can help address the global challenges that impact us all. Our first guest and moderator of today's discussion is Joel Rosenthal, President of Carnegie Council and Editor-in-Chief of Ethics and International Affairs Journal. For nearly 30 years, Joel has championed ethics as a force for good in both international affairs and daily life. And I'd just like to insert a personal note that when I graduated from Columbia University from graduate school, the Carnegie Council for Ethics and International Affairs was my first fellowship. And it was such an extraordinarily welcoming environment. And it really sort of was foundational in many ways for where my career went. So it is especially delightful and a privilege to be bringing the Carnegie Council here to NYU. Joel is joined by Michael Schur, the author of How to Be Perfect, the correct answer to every moral question, and an acclaimed writer and producer of hit shows such as The Office, Brooklyn 99, and The Good Place. And I told Michael earlier, but I'll share with everyone that I am also deeply grateful to Michael because during COVID, I'm a mom of two boys, that The Office, Parks and Rec, The Good Place really became a happy place for my family. So I have to say that it was very, very important. So, and with that, it is my pleasure to hand the program over to Joel, and thank you all again for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you, Carolyn, and thank you, NYU, for hosting, and thank you for the right salutation. Happy Global Ethics Day, right? That should be a happy Global Ethics Day. So Michael, from the moment I read your book earlier this year, I knew that you would be our speaker for Global Ethics Day.
Really?
Absolutely. So thank you for accepting the invitation.
I retroactively feel pressure to accept this invitation.
So 9 years ago, by the power of assertion, Carnegie Council declared Global Ethics Day. And we've engaged with thousands of people, hundreds of institutions, and I guess over 75 countries. We're going to hit them all eventually. And we are recognized now as, it's on Wikipedia, so it must be true, the third Wednesday of every October is Global Ethics Day, and by the power of our assertion. So you're making us credible now. And as we start, just a quick shout out to the live watch parties that are going on right now. St. Andrews University in Scotland, Emory University in Atlanta, Dartmouth College in New Hampshire, Marist College in Poughkeepsie, New York, Pepperdine University in Malibu, California, among many others. And special shout out to those who got up early, 8 o'clock in the morning in California to see this. So we have hundreds of people I know, in addition to these watch parties that are watching. So based on the empirical evidence, it seems that ethics sells. We have The Good Place, we have your book, we have all these people who are tuned in. And so my first question, just to kick things off, is why do you think ethics and how do you think ethics resonate today? Is there something in the zeitgeist that people are responding to?
Yeah, to some extent that was the bet that I was making when I conceived of the show, was that this subject, which almost as a hobby had become very important to me. I was like an enthusiast more than a scholar. I was betting that the ideas were interesting enough to resonate with people. I did not know when I was creating the show that thanks to a former United States president who shall remain nameless, that the word ethics was going to appear in the headline of every major newspaper for 4 consecutive years. So I think that to some degree, the events of the nation supported the idea that ethics mattered in a very weird way. But also, I just felt like the problems that face us are so massive and global and systemic and overwhelming that something like ethics, which doesn't ask you to identify with any kind of political party or tribe or organization or anything else, it's just like the rules for living, for the rules for good living, they were being observed by everyone. And this obviously redoubled, I think, during the pandemic because, as we were saying before, the pandemic led to a situation where every single human being on Earth was facing the exact same questions at the same time for, I think, the first time ever. So I believed when creating the show and writing the book that ethics, if presented in a way that sort of lowered the barrier to entry, because very few people wander into a Barnes & Noble, pick up Kant's Critique of Pure Reason and say, this looks like a fun beach read, right? So if you can lower the barrier of entry to people and just simply present the ideas, which I think are fascinating, my bet was that they would also think they were fascinating. And I think to some extent that was proven true.
Yeah. So one way we were thinking about it at Carnegie Council was sort of ethics as an antidote, and so an antidote to sort of cynicism or even nihilism that we see in public life. And our sense was that, you know, our audience or our constituents are looking for hope, but not sort of the, you know, sort of idealistic sense of hope, but like actionable hope, right? You know, things that we can do. So is that sort of how you think about ethics, as something that's actionable, something that you can do, something that you can apply for yourself and then turn it towards society?
Absolutely. I mean, my interest in it came directly from blundering into a situation, doing something that I felt in my gut wasn't right, and not knowing how to explain to myself or to anyone else why it was wrong. And that led, I write about a bunch of them in the book, but that led to me thinking like there's gotta be, someone must have written this down, right? Like I'm not the first person to enter a situation, screw up, and then need, in order to feel better about myself, just an explanation for what happened. Like if your car breaks down, you take it somewhere and someone who knows about cars says, here's what's wrong with your car. And if you make a mistake in an ethical situation, there are mechanics who have done this before who can say like, oh, here's where you blew it. And the process of reading those people and of like synthesizing ideas and talking to smart people who teach this stuff and everything else gave me this incredible sense of calm, because I was still blundering around and making mistakes, but at least when I made them, I could understand. I had a vocabulary, a structure, a scaffolding to explain to myself and the people I had injured, when I apologized to them, what I had done and that was wrong and why it was wrong and how I was sorry in a specific way. I used to go to therapy, and therapy is the same thing for the soul, right?
Right.
Or for the brain in some way. why do I keep doing these things? Well, here's one possible reason why you're doing them. That sense of calm has never left me, of just, oh, there's an explanation, or at least there's an understanding I can approach. Ethics to me is that exact thing for our behavior. It's for our behaviors, our interactions with other people.
Mm-hmm. So let's think about the context that we're in today. As we sit here, I was just thinking about the headlines in the world that we're in. 60% of Americans will have an election denier on their ballot next month. Kamikaze drones are hitting Kiev. The pandemic lingers. Climate change is now often referred to as climate emergency. So some people will say, and I get this question a lot, what are you talking about? Ethics don't matter at all. How do you respond to sort of making
Who's saying that to you? Who are you hanging out with?
Meaning that the world that we're living in is not operating by any sense of principle.
Okay, so they're saying ethics, it's not that ethics don't exist, it's that no one is
no one's abiding by it.
Yeah, I mean, look, if no one were using seatbelts and everyone who got into a car accident were flying through the windshield, the answer wouldn't be, well, who cares about seatbelts? They're not being used anyway. Right? It'd be like, well, you should use seatbelts, and that way you won't fly through the windshield when you get into an accident. So, I mean, those are all examples of ways in which were ethics being applied more rigorously or cared about more intensely. I don't think those problems go away. I don't think if you and I sat down with Vladimir Putin and we're like, listen, buddy, there's some ethical problems with what you're doing. Like, I don't think he would suddenly go like, oh my goodness, you're right, I hadn't thought about this. Like, it's not that it solves problems immediately. It's simply that there are people who could greatly stand to benefit from understanding the rules of ethics or the theories of ethics. And those problems don't get solved, but they might be lessened for a number of people. Like, a big sort of moment in my personal journey with this stuff was realizing that the question that ethics is asking, in very broadly, isn't what is good and what is bad, but rather what is better and what is worse, right? It's all on this graded scale, and even the purest of philosophers, the most rigorous, intense philosophers, didn't necessarily believe that you had to be perfect. You had to like nail everything. Right. It was simply like, here's a way to make perhaps a better choice than the one you were about to make. And so yes, those problems don't get solved if ethics is a more fundamental part of human life, but they're lessened. And that, like, what are we here for if not to lessen pain and agony and anguish for people the world over?
Yeah, no, well said. So part of the process is, this is a nuanced question, but you're sort of judging and not judging, right? You know, in other words, you want to find your true north, and you want to have some moral compass that can help you get there, but others are going to make different decisions. And so, you know, I was thinking about Pope Francis, right, who famously said, you know, who am I to judge, right, at the end of one of his commentaries, and you know, you're the Pope. That's your job, right? To judge, right? So
it would be funny to go back in time, grab some like 14th century popes, bring them to the present day, and have them listen to him say that.
Who am I? But you see where I'm getting at, like this sort of the sense of making a decision and perhaps a commitment, but also being humble about it. And that seems to be a problem in our society today, where it's like my right versus ethics is often seen as another sort of challenge we have. Ethics, oh, it's your right versus somebody else's right or somebody else's wrong, and so on. So have you thought about how to open up that space a little more for judging, not judging?
So a frequent rebuttal to when someone is posed with, or someone is presented with an action that maybe one person thinks is the ethical thing to do. A frequent rebuttal is to say, that impinges upon my liberty, right? That's a very American thing. Liberty, freedom, American flag, bald eagle, get off my lawn kind of liberty, right? And the thing that bums me out about it is, I believe that the idea here is, as an individual, alone in your house, go nuts, right? Like you have all the liberty you want. You can listen to whatever music you want. You can say whatever you want out loud. You can do anything that you believe is you expressing your true beliefs. You leave your house and you bump into other people. Then suddenly there's, like, imagine like a sphere around you, and that sphere bumps up around the sphere of another person, and now it's not just liberty, now it's a negotiation. Now this person has a liberty and you have a liberty, a sense of liberty, and those two things meet, and where they meet is ethics, right? It's like when your actions start to affect other people, you don't have unfettered liberty. It's never been intended as that. So it's two sides of the same coin. The first side is you have to understand that your sense of the world and what you are allowed to do changes when you enter a public sphere, right? And the other side is that when you do bump into those people, when you are negotiating in these little moments or big moments about what is allowable, what's permissible, what ought we to do, what should we do, what can we do, that the people who are bumping into each other come from very different places. They have very different upbringings. They have very different worldviews. And the answer isn't simply, I'm right and you're wrong. The answer is, okay, this is a very contractualist argument. For those of you who are real philosophy nerds, contractualism is invented by a man named Tim Scanlon, emeritus at Harvard, who believes that when coming up with rules for our society, we ought to sit around a big table, we start pitching rules, everyone can veto those rules and say like that we will not adopt that rule as long as that person, and this is the key, is being reasonable. The only people who get to sit at the table are reasonable people. Now, how do you define reasonable? So that's one thing philosophers are great at, putting out awesome ideas and then not explaining them. So, but essentially what he says is you are a reasonable person if you restrain your own needs and desires to the same degree, not more or less, but to the same degree that I restrain my needs and desires. It's a little bit technical, but it essentially means like everyone's got to give a little bit. Everybody has to understand that their way of thinking about this situation is not the way, that there's another person involved in the transaction. And so when it comes to judging other people, I think it's important to take all of this stuff into account, into context, and to remind yourself that in order to sit at this table, you have to restrain your needs and wants and desires to the same extent that you want them to. And once you get into that mindset, it becomes you're a lot less likely to simply write someone off or judge them with a broad brush or whatever, because you are now understanding that there's a mutual tension here. You have to come at this, you have to limit yourself in the same way you would like that person to limit him or herself.
That was great, very helpful and very persuasive, but I'm going to judge. So, and I'm going to judge the free riders, right? So we're dealing with global scale issues, right? So global scale issues are almost by definition like collective action problems, and people don't cooperate, right? They don't listen. I don't know. So I'm just sort of, how do you think about? So here we are, we need to think of ways that go to values and go to interests that will encourage international cooperation around shared challenges like climate and refugees and so on.
Right.
So what do we do with the free riders? How do you think about that? Okay,
so for those of you who don't know, free rider problem, very famous problem in philosophy, crowded subway train or trolley, jam-packed, not any more room for anyone to board. All of the people on board have paid their requisite fee to board the trolley. A person comes running up, just as it's leaving, grabs onto the outside, gets a free ride. Question is, did that person do anything wrong? What's interesting about the free rider problem is that if you go through different schools of thought and philosophy, you can arrive at a point where you might say, nothing wrong with it. For example, the utilitarian worldview, which is simply maximize pleasure and minimize pain and suffering. You might say, well, none of the people on board was really inconvenienced. They paid a fee, they got to where they're going to go, and this extra guy jumped on and hung on, so you get a little extra happiness because he got a ride to where he's going to go. Maybe there's nothing wrong with it. Right. But if you follow it through, Another thing the utilitarian said was when you're calculating how much pain or pleasure was created by an event, you have to take into account the fact that everyone in the society knows that this thing happened. They understand that it could happen to them someday. And so now you should imagine all of the people inside the train just staring a hole through the back of the head of the guy who's gotten the free ride, right? Because it's like, I paid $3, I got on the trolley, and I'm trapped in this sweaty, awful space, and this guy got a free ride. That's not fair. So their pain actually rises in the calculation, right? So you can go through all of the theories, deontology, Kant's theory, or virtue ethics, which is Aristotle, and you can basically come to the same conclusion, which is the free rider is among the most annoying people that we have on the planet.
So you're judging them.
I'm hardcore judging them. And the reason that I think it's annoying is because what happens when you know this problem is you start to see it everywhere. I live in Los Angeles. We have a terrible drought. It's been going on to some degree since I've lived there, long before I moved. And there are water restrictions, severe water restrictions. You're only allowed to water your lawn like 1 day a week right now because of the lack of water. So in my neighborhood, you walk through and it's almost a badge of honor, like people's lawns are dying, and that's good. It doesn't look good, but it means that everyone's following the rules. And then in a couple houses, it's like a rainforest. It's just lush green grass and beautiful rose bushes, and it's like, this is a free rider. This person is saying, everyone else needs to do this, but I don't have to because I'm special. That's really the attitude, is the rules don't apply to me. I can do whatever I want, and I will benefit from everybody else following the rules. So water restrictions, you may, I'm guessing, know a person who said like, well, I'm not gonna get vaccinated, but it'll be okay because everybody else will get vaccinated, so I'll be safe. Super annoying, right? Like the people who follow this mindset have declared, A, that they're special, and B, they want to keep participating in the society. They just don't want to do any work. They don't want to chip in. They don't want to throw into the pot the way that everybody else is doing, and they still want the benefits. People who don't want to pay taxes but still want their garbage collected. I mean, again, once you're aware of the free rider problem, you just see it everywhere, and it's always really, really vexing and annoying. So I think one of the very basic underpinnings of a successful, flourishing society is that everyone follows the rules that society has put out there as being necessary to have that society thrive. And when there are too many free riders, things start to crack and fray, and you start getting weird protests about wearing masks before the vaccine is out, and you start to sense this behavior, which is that you don't want to pitch in. And it's the most basic thing. Our parents taught us this when we were really little. You make a mess, you clean it up. You want to be part of the group, you got to like go by the rules of the group. Like, these are very basic lessons that seem at some point, again, I think it's this idea that unfettered liberty and freedom supplants everything else. And you start to see the society crack and fray when that happens.
You highlight this concept of Ubuntu in the book, and I thought you did it beautifully. And I don't know if this was your definition or someone else's, but a person is a person through other people.
Yeah.
And I thought that was sort of part of the antidote, ethics as the antidote in a way.
100%.
It's just to recognize that. I guess, and I know we don't have any answers, so I just want to bear down just a little bit more, though, about what to do about the free riders. In other words, is it just revealing them, shaming them, educating? What do you have any sense of, or do you just say it's just the power of recognition and understanding it for what it is?
I would love to believe that modeling would work. I think that's been proven not to be the case.
Where you can just show it.
Yeah, just every like.
Yeah.
I think we are perhaps we go a little too easy on free riders in this country. And that doesn't mean throw them in prison or something. It just means that I think too often there is an explanation that is proffered for the thing that they're doing that intends to over mitigate the reasons why they're doing it or something. Like, right. And I think it's okay when everyone in your neighborhood is saying like, there's no water. Like, one thing you need for a city is water, right? So there's no water in LA, and so we're all gonna cut back, and when someone doesn't, I think that there is no good explanation that I can possibly think of. I am open to hearing them, but I can't possibly think of a good reason for that. And I kind of think Aristotle writes a lot about, he writes about a lot of things, but he writes about shame. And he says, a person with no sense of shame feels no disgrace. And I think that sometimes light shaming is helpful. I think that it's possible that it's, in theory, it's possible that person doesn't know about the water restrictions. Maybe that person doesn't live in this house full time, right? Maybe they live somewhere else and this is a second home, or maybe it's they've spent a year overseas and they haven't heard about it. And so by light shaming, I literally mean calling to attention the rule that is not being followed in a polite, pleasant, friendly, kindly, neighborly way. Might work. They might go, oh my God, I'm so sorry, right? So I think we ought to be a little better about pushing back on free rider problems than we are now. Right now, I think we're all afraid, we're all timid. There's a sense of like, well, maybe this person has some good reason for it, that I don't want to get involved. There's a lot of I don't want to get involved. And I think the solution probably has to be like, again, politely and pleasantly and straightforwardly bringing to attention the situation. Maybe that is where we start.
Right, that's a good transition into another theme that you deal with, that you highlight in the book, and it's a challenge that we face at Carnegie Council, not among our friends or the people watching, but those sort of skeptical.
Sure.
Which is moral exhaustion. Which is, what do you want me to? Here come the ethics people. What do you want me to do?
Right.
And you've really thought about that. Could you share some of your thoughts about how to deal with this sort of endless? Part of it's just social media and intake and all that, but there is a sense of moral exhaustion, and I know you've thought about it.
I'm glad you brought this term up, because in the book I wrote, I decided that I was going to try to coin a term that could be like the thing that makes me academically famous. So I just invented a term called moral exhaustion, and I capitalize it everywhere in the book. It's got to be capitalized, because if it's not capitalized, people won't know it's important. And I've just straight up asserted that this is my idea.
Right, we have you against the NYU School of Professional Studies banner, so
there you go.
You're certified.
So yes, what I mean by moral exhaustion is the sense that if you start to care about ethics, and you start to care about doing the right thing or the better thing instead of the worst thing, here's what happens. You have to buy a car, and you buy a hybrid car, or better yet, you buy an electric car, because you're like, this is better than buying a car powered by gas. Then you're at a cocktail party, and your most annoying friend approaches you and says, oh, you bought an electric car. Do you know how those batteries are made? They have to mine the elements from these mines in Africa or Southeast Asia or somewhere, and it's actually on balance worse for the environment. And it's worse on a human rights level to buy an electric car because of the human toll and the earth toll that comes from making the battery. And then you think, oh God, and you go home and you do some research, and then that points you to this other article, and the other article says, no, actually that's not true, and here's the blah, blah, blah. And then like you look at the clock and it's 4 in the morning and you're nowhere, right? You have come to the conclusion that every single possible option you could make leads to pain, suffering, misery, sadness, and the world is gonna end. And there's nothing you can do about it, and you watch a rerun of The Bachelor and you go to sleep. So that feeling overwhelmed me personally. The more I got into ethics, the more I started questioning all of my decisions, consumer and otherwise, and came to the conclusion that they're all bad, that life is impossible, that we should all give up and hide in our basements. And that's a very real feeling. I still have it all the time. I poured water into this cup, which is made of plastic, and then came out here and saw this cup, which is made of glass, and immediately was like, I blew it, I ruined it, this is garbage, this is refuse, this is petroleum-based, it's gonna go into the garbage and go to a landfill. It's gonna poison the water, animals will drink the water, the animals will die, we'll eat the animals, we'll get the plastic in our bodies, we'll get sick, we'll die, because I did this instead of this, right? So what I'm arguing for is to give ourselves a break from time to time, to understand again that we're after better or worse, not good or bad. There's a woman named Susan Wolf who teaches it at UNC Chapel Hill, who's an excellent writer and philosopher, and she has a paper called Moral Saints, in which she talks about the impossibility of achieving something like perfection in the world of morality, whether you're a utilitarian or a Kantian or anything. Perfection is both impossible to attain and also a bad goal to even achieve. And the reason that she says this is, among other things, she says there seems to be a limit to how much morality we can stand. Meaning, you cannot make everything you do about morality for two reasons. One, you will get exhausted and you will lie down and put a cold compress on your head and never want to leave your house. And two, you become a very boring person, right? If everything is about morality in your life, if everything is about trying to maximize good in whatever way you define good, you don't learn how to cook French food, and you don't learn how to play tennis, and you don't just go to a movie with your friend, or you don't hang out with your kids, because you're constantly calculating, is this okay? Is there something I could do that would be better than this? And that's not what living a life is. Like, living a life, a full, three-dimensional, verdant life, means doing things that are outside the definition of moral or immoral. So I think the key is engagement in the issues. Care about the issues. Pay attention, learn about them, read about them when you're making your choices about what car to buy, or what pair of clothes, what pair of jeans to buy, or where to go on vacation, or how to get there, or anything. Be aware of the moral component to those actions. It's vital that no one can be a free rider in that regard. Everyone, I believe, has to be aware of it, think about it, mull it over, crunch it down, figure out what the right move is, and then occasionally cook some French food and play tennis and don't think about it, because if all you do is think about it, it'll wear you out, and you won't be a good moral agent anymore, because you'll be annoying. No one will want to hang out with you. I can say this from experience. No one will want to hang out with you, and you won't be living what amounts to a human life.
Well, thank you. You end the book, the last chapter is a letter to your children, which I think is very significant. Now they have to hang out with you. They have no escape.
Tell them that. They don't. That's not what they believe.
And I understand, and you are using it as a sort of a way to sort of gather the sort of the conclusions that you could pass along to your children. But I wanted to just push you a little bit to think about, next generation, and if you have any thoughts about, not just for your children, but the next generation, about the sort of the world they're coming into, and just kind of the influences and influencers on them when it comes to ethics. I mean, it seems like it's an extremely challenging moment right now, where in the past, institutions used to, transmit values. Places like universities, places like Carnegie Council, right? Places like churches, schools, and so on. So, and they seem to be, there's so much skepticism in the world today, and our influencers are, Elon Musk and other people. That's who people are listening to and paying attention to. So. Anyway, long question, but next generation, the world that they're seeing, and how do you sort of pass the baton to them?
Well, I will say that I am greatly encouraged by what I perceive to be a lot of, I guess you would call it, self-possession on the part of younger folks. They don't seem to have reverence in the way that I think our generation did for whatever the institutional or systemic modes of thought and behavior were that preceded them. They seem to be very much thinking along the lines of, you have all blown it, meaning our generation. You've totally blown it. We don't believe you when you talk. We don't care about what you have to say. You've ruined the earth.
Right.
The world is a disaster, and it's up to us to fix it, and so we're going to try to go about this our own way, which I believe is absolutely the right way that they should be thinking, because we have blown it. We have, it's certainly from a systemic, like political or a social way, we have done very, very little to ensure a good future for them. Yeah. And I think they should basically be trying to kick us out of power as quickly as possible. Like everyone, I'm 46, everyone my age and up gone, like as quickly as possible.
You pick 46, that's a scientific, 46.
That's 46 is I crunched the numbers, that's the right age. And so they certainly when it comes to something like climate justice, right? Like climate justice, most people first thought about this when Al Gore released An Inconvenient Truth, which was in 2001. And since from between 2001 until like 8 weeks ago, we did nothing about it, literally nothing. It got so much worse between the time that a very well-known and thoughtful person raised his hand and said, hey, I just want to let you all know that if we don't do something, the planet will be uninhabitable. We ignored that, like deeply ignored it, mocked it and ignored it for 20 years. And so if you are a 25-year-old person right now, why in the world would you entrust the future to people who made that happen? Like there's no reason to. Like there's a massive amount of evidence that we've ruined everything. So I think that ultimately the folks that I've spoken to and talked to who were let's call it roughly college age, give or take 5-10 years on either side, those folks have a much more determined, they seem much more determined to not only fix some of the problems that we ignored, but also to pay attention to things like ethics, like morality, like justice that traditionally have been afterthoughts in America. And I think my great hope is that they are no longer afterthoughts, that they're something closer to the core of what this generation cares about and believes in.
Oh, that's great. I've been told, I'm going to open it up to questions, so please get ready. I'm told that online we have representation from Nigeria, Ghana, India, Botswana, Uganda, UK, Austria, Trinidad, Tobago, Canada, South Africa, Bahrain, Qatar, Tanzania, and in the United States, Florida, Georgia, Pennsylvania, Utah, Massachusetts, Ohio, New Hampshire, Virginia, South Carolina, California. That's pretty impressive.
Great.
Although it is interesting in the United States, we have to break it down by state. So there's significant difference. Let me start out with one question from our online audience, and I'm going to come to in person, so please get ready. There was a great question here, basically going to the question about how can society use storytelling and comedy to promote ethics? And I could even sort of broaden that out to just arts and culture generally as part of the way we think about ethics.
Traditionally, an enormous amount of social change has come about through storytelling. Yeah. It's not hard to think of movies, TV shows, plays, things, moments in time that captured a social issue that were made much more comprehensible or understandable just because it's entertaining. It's dramatic and entertaining, and you absorb things, I think, better from a story than from a lecture. That isn't to say that lecturing is bad, it's just that I think different people learn in different ways, and I think that, an audience, a lecture hall seats 500 people, a TV show can be watched by millions of people around the globe, and if the dramatic nature, I mean, the Greeks knew this, right? This is everyone, thousands of years, social messages or political messages have been worked out through stories. So I think it's always a good medium. Comedy specifically, I think, is an excellent delivery mechanism for a message. Like when I pitched this show, the Good Place to NBC, the thing I said to them was, I promise I won't make this seem like homework. Like, this is not going to be a lecture. This is going to be a funny comedy show with jokes. And then baked into the middle of it is going to be lessons or interesting ideas about ethics and morality.
So about the comedy, and this is important, but it's what connects us as being human. I mean, there's something about, you mentioned the Greeks, about what makes a classic. Well, in some ways it's because it's timeless. It travels across time in a way, because you recognize there's something essential in it.
Yeah.
That's human, that kind of bonds us, even if we disagree or whatever, but there's some kind of recognition, right?
Yeah, and also it's just people like to laugh, right? So it's a very human art form. It's an ancient human art form. And it's ancient and sustained through time because it's the most joyous thing you can do. It's the most, like, going to a movie that's funny and laughing with another group of people, nothing beats that, right? Yeah. So I believe that that using humor to get a message across is among the most effective ways that we have to get a message across. It's not, the message itself isn't always going to be the purest version of the message,
Right.
but it does work, and that's why both with the show and the book, it was like, I'm going to write this like a comedy writer, engaging in this stuff, because that no one's going to listen to me if I wag my finger and tell everyone about philosophy. Like, no one wants to hear from me on that. Like, if you want to study philosophy, you go to college, you go to PhD program, you study philosophy. If you want to learn the essence of what ethics is and why I think it matters, I'm going to get those ideas across much better if I can make people laugh.
We have a question from the audience.
He told you to get ready. You didn't listen.
Tatiana, did you have a question?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
Hi, I did get a chance to read your book, so I really found it interesting, your thoughts on.
Oh.
Really? Oh, for the virtual talk. Oh, sorry, because
Yeah, yeah.
I thought my voice was pretty loud. So now I'm gonna. In your book, you mention that there are people who are luckier than others, and that the people who are luckier owe or need to do a little bit more. And I found that really fascinating, and I kind of kept reading that commentary, and I'd love for our audience here and virtually for you to explain that a little bit more to them, because I think it's a really interesting concept that may spur some of Joel's points about action, and maybe a point of action.
Right, so as quickly as I can explain this, a sociologist named Robert Frank wrote this book on luck, which really was very meaningful to me. He was playing tennis and had a heart attack, and there happened to be an ambulance right nearby because it had responded to another accident. That ambulance got to him in like 2 minutes and saved his life. And if it had taken 5 minutes, he would have died. And so he woke up and had this very lovely realization, which was from that point on, every moment in his life that he had of any kind was due purely to luck. And that led him to the conclusion that people underestimate the degree to which they have been lucky. And the book is really fascinating because it talks about various famous people, like Bill Gates, right? Bill Gates, genius, visionary, all of those things. Bill Gates also happened to go to a high school, I think, that had like the very first computer that ever existed was in his high school. And then he went to Harvard, and Harvard had like the very first primitive, like internal internet that ever existed. And so to some degree, his career is due to good fortune. Just like he worked hard to get into Harvard, but he could have worked equally hard and gone to Yale, and then he wouldn't have had that exact situation unfold in front of him, right? Like that was luck that Harvard happened to have that thing. And what the point that Frank makes is that people don't tend to ascribe their success to luck because it makes them feel like they're saying, I don't deserve what I got. And that is anathema to most successful people. The idea that you would, how dare you say, I worked hard and I blah, 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 blah. But it's like, yeah, also you got super lucky, right? Warren Buffett, alone amongst billionaires in the world, at least to my understanding, talks about this constantly. He talks about winning what he calls the ovarian lottery, which is to say he was born a white male in America at the moment he was born, and that removed from his life 1,000 obstacles that other people would have had to jump over simply to come up to even with him in terms of the beginning of his life. That's a lovely observation for anyone to have. It's an even lovelier observation for like the 7th richest man in the world to have, because he is acknowledging that this isn't just all because of his brilliant genius, right? So I have thought about that a lot in my life, in my own career, about the degree to which yes, I worked hard and I did all my homework. I was very nerdy and I read all the books and I got good grades on all the tests. But also at various moments in my life, and I list 20 of them in the book, something happened that had nothing to do with how hard I worked or how brilliant I am or anything else. That just the next card on the deck was, for me, was an ace, like 1,000 times in a row. So understanding that and really deeply internalizing it, I think, allows us to approach something closer to what I would consider to be justice, because it gives you empathy for people who maybe are just as brilliant as you are and worked just as hard as you are, but didn't win the ovarian lottery and didn't have the next card on that came up was a 7 of clubs, and they really needed an ace, and things didn't break the right way. So I believe that when you're calculating what it is that you owe to other people, there are minimums that we all face. This is not a situation where if you're an unlucky person, and whatever that means, that you get to do whatever you want. There are contractualist minimums, Tim Scanlon would say. There are virtue minimums, Aristotle would say, deontological minimums, utilitarian minimums, however you care to calculate them. There are certain things we all have to do to participate in society, to be good people. After that, if you are Warren Buffett or me, there's probably a bigger gap between Warren Buffett and me, or anyone who got a bunch of aces off the top of the deck, you owe a little bit more to other people. I think of it as paying off the gods of luck. That's how I think of it. I think of it as I got super lucky in a number of different ways, and when it comes time to take a moral accounting of my behavior, I should be judged much, much, much more harshly than people who didn't get as lucky as I did. So that doesn't just mean you have to give more money to charity, although it does mean that. But it also means just I can afford in my life to do more than a lot of other people. In whatever way you mean do more, volunteer, pay money, hold myself to a higher standard. I can afford to take a few days off and fly to New York and come to this event without it ruining my life. Most people can't do that. Even if they wanted to, they couldn't do it. And so I believe that what you owe to other people scales up. As you consider how lucky you've been in your life, I believe it really scales up. And I think that the people who are at the top of the systems of power and of status and of prestige and of money and of everything else should be judged accordingly. And I think it's fair to hold those people to a much higher account than we hold the average citizen. That's my belief.
I'm just going to ask
Yeah, that was beautifully said. And if you want a nice compliment to that, read the chapter where Michael does a great takedown of Ayn Rand. It's classic. And,
I had when I first pitched this book, I had this idea that I would read all of one of her novels and just fisk it, go line by line and just make fun of her. But I remembered that her novels are 1,400 pages long, and I kind of bailed on that.
But it's amazing how seriously it's taken in certain quarters.
It is wild to me.
In our public life.
Truly shocking. But again, liberty, freedom, right? These things are so deeply ingrained into the American psyche. They're really hard to shake, man.
Well, that's a good lead into another question from online. Is ethics something that people just sort of fall into, or do you feel there's a major opportunity and need to actively weave ethics into all levels of education? Of course, there you have to deal with whose ethics, what ethics, and so on. But we talked a little bit before about education, and I'll just also preview this by thinking about, again, the standing, particularly that churches used to have, in intellectual formation and also public life. That's definitely faded in contemporary times. And so I'm just how do you think about? Let's just focus for a minute then on education and how we might think about ethics and education.
I firmly believe that the things that we teach in this country, starting in kindergarten and going through university, are not wrong, but less useful than certain other things we could teach. The Greeks kind of nailed this to me. The Greeks taught civics, ethics, rhetoric, philosophy, and then other sciences, right? Civics, ethics, and rhetoric. Civics, ethics, and rhetoric. Just think for a second the ways in which we might be better off if certain subjects were made optional in our education system, and what we're taught every year were civics, ethics, and rhetoric. Learn how to be a part of a society, learn how to talk to other people and engage in debates and arguments with other people, and learn how to act in an ethical manner. You would have to figure out which ethics to teach, but you could just teach them all and let everyone learn, take from it what that was my theory, just teach them all, not say this is right and this is wrong. But my kids are 14 and 12, and they've gotten to the age now where they've started to ask me, why do I have to know this? Which is a question I asked my parents. Kids have been asking their parents for generations, right? Why do I have to learn pre-calculus? Why do I have to learn this subject? I'm never going to use it. There's no good answer to this. Parents have been lying to children for generations because most kids are not going to need pre-calculus in their lives. They're not going to need chemistry in their lives. They will need civics, ethics, and rhetoric in their lives to be good, flourishing people, right? So if I could snap my fingers and redesign the American education system, Thanos style, I would say, look, chemistry is vital. Chemistry is important. Biology is vital and important. We need to have those things available for kids to learn because we need engineers and we need scientists and we need research chemists and we need all that stuff. I'm not saying get rid of it. I'm saying that as the core of what we want to relay to young people, civics, you can't do better to me than civics, ethics, and rhetoric. Those are that I believe would lead to a healthier society if everybody truly understood what it meant to be a citizen, how to participate in government action, how to be in the world. How to talk to people, how to argue with people effectively and efficiently, how to learn from people through argument, and then how to act in an ethical way. That's my Thanos dream. I'm like benevolent Thanos. I'm gonna get all those gems and the big glove, and I'm gonna snap my fingers, and everyone will learn civics, ethics, and rhetoric.
Well, that's great. That's something we can do.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Where do you keep the glove? Is it nearby?
Question from the audience over here? Yeah.
Hi, thank you so much for being here. My name is Samantha. I'm here today with Fordham as a graduate student in ethics and society. I'm also here as a member of the entertainment industry here in New York. I am mindful in these two worlds that we have an outsized platform in the entertainment industry. I'm also mindful that that platform is under ethical scrutiny for very good reason. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering, from your position in the industry, and all of it that you bring, which is more than I bring, where do you sit with that? And if you can expand it, the entertainment industry is wonky, but if you can expand it beyond the entertainment industry too, we come together in these groups where we try to do stuff and we call it work. And some of it is more ethical than other of it, but we try to bring our ethic selves and create a better world as we do it. Tell me about your place in the industry and tell me how that expands outward.
Well, some of this stuff you're talking about, the reckoning, largely speaking, I would say is the Me Too movement, and then a corollary is post George Floyd sort of social and racial reckoning. It was so long overdue, it's like embarrassing. An enormous number of people in the industry have been called to the mat for things that they had been doing with impunity since Hollywood was founded. Like there's literally, Hollywood, not unique among industries, but a rare small number of industries that had essentially never had any kind of reckoning at all with its behaviors and practices, like at all. And if you go back and read about the old days, the 30s, 40s, and 50s, like the people who were held in the highest esteem were the people who were the best at covering things up. Like that was like the people who got to the top were like, oh, that guy really knows how to, like when someone gets drunk and kills someone in a drunk driving accident, like this guy did a great job keeping that out of the public eye. And that's how you like achieved power and status, right? So I'm thrilled and overjoyed that like that reckoning has begun. It has not been close to ended, but it's begun. I will defend Hollywood a little bit by saying that the number of systemic problems and horrors in the entertainment industry, which truly was shocking and blew people's minds, as well it should have. I don't think that there aren't those problems in the banking industry and the insurance industry and the auto parts distribution industry. Like, it's just that the people in Hollywood are famous, right? So we got, it seemed for a while like the way it was being reported was like, this is the worst place on earth. It's not the worst place on earth. It's not good, but it's not the worst place on earth. These problems exist in every corner of America and the world, And I'm weirdly happy that because the people in Hollywood were famous, the digging up of those roots and the overturning of those rocks to reveal all the slimy creatures milling around in the dirt, because they were famous, I think it did massive amount of good for the movement and for movements like it. So as far as where I sit with it, I'm happy that it's happening. I hope it continues to happen. I think it will. There seems to be a genuine commitment on the part of leadership at pretty much every major studio to saying, like, this is the beginning. We are not done. We're not going to pretend this doesn't exist. We're going to get something closer to gender parity in terms of pay. We're going to get something closer to equal representation of traditionally marginalized groups of people, ethnically, gender-wise, like all sorts of groups of people now have value, have inherent value. Their stories need to be heard. They need to be working at every, not just in front of the camera, but behind the camera. That stuff feels real to me, and it's lovely, and I hope it continues. And I believe that, again, because a lot of the people we're talking about are famous, then it draws more scrutiny, and it should, and it hopefully can then be a model for other industries in the way that they go about their own reckoning.
Hi. I've always wondered this about ethics. We have a lot of different schools and a lot of different ideas. So is there a standard of ethics that everyone follows? Because we could have an ethical problem and virtue ethics would have a different answer, and the categorical imperative would have a different answer. So is there something that's universal that everyone follows?
Philosopher named Derek Parfit had the same question, and he's maybe the most brilliant man who lived in the 20th century, and he decided that there was a universal ethics or something approaching that, and he spent his entire life writing one book that was going to explain the whole thing, and it came out and it's like 2,500 pages long and it's impossible to read. And he described these different ethical theories as people climbing a mountain, the same mountain on different cliff faces, right? Like utilitarians are coming up this way, and Aristotle's coming up this way, and Kant is coming up this way, and Tim Scanlon's coming up this way. And he really believed that there is like a peak we can reach where we can unify all of these theories into one giant theory. I don't know. I have no idea. I'm not nearly the scholar that if he can't figure it out, I'm not going to figure it out like in the next 5 minutes. So, but what I believe is true is that while in a given situation, you might have a different view of what is right and wrong based on your own personal preference for an ethical theory, but it's not going to be wildly different. If you're talking about people who all believe in a certain, that ethics matters, you might come to different conclusions, but you're not going to come to one person's not going to say it's okay to murder this person, and another person says no, it's not. Although, in classic philosophy fashion, my brain just came up with like 3 ways that might happen. But I believe that what matters isn't finding the universality. I believe that what matters is that if the people you're talking to and you all have a basic understanding of the concept of ethics, you're going to be okay. You're going to muddle through. You're going to pitch slightly different ideas and have a debate and argue about who's right. But you're ultimately going to make a decision that is beneficial instead of detrimental because you all care. It's really about the attempt at virtue or the attempt to conceive of a deontological maxim or the attempt to maximize pleasure and minimize pain. As long as the attempt is there, the striving, the trying is there, I think you're going to be okay, generally speaking.
One more?
Hello. I do agree that there is no universality to ethics, but I'm also sitting here wondering that causes a very existential problem of me thinking about what's ethical for the world around me, but the world not necessarily believing that that's the ethical thing to do. And in those situations, would it be right for me to do what the world considers ethical, or do I go on to do what I think is ethical? And where do the consequences for my actions come into play? Like, am I going to be responsible for what I do? Or is it just me accepting that I did the best I could do, so it doesn't really matter what consequence my ethical decision had?
It's so funny to ask that question with like 60 seconds left. Okay, I think lines of distinction would need to be drawn here if you're talking about laws versus simply ethical choices, which are overlapping but not identical things, right? So when you're talking about who's responsible, it a little bit depends on what the choice is and whether the choice that you would make as an ethical person would violate a law in the country in which you existed. And by the way, it doesn't necessarily mean, obviously, we can all think of examples of people who made ethical choices that did violate laws, and we would all say that those people were right and the law was wrong. That's why they overlap, but they're not identical, right? As far as the difference between you doing something that you think is ethical versus what the world thinks is ethical, that's a really tough one. If we take laws out of the equation for a second, that's a really hard question. Philosopher named Bernard Williams, who I really like, talks a lot about integrity. And he doesn't mean like being a morally upstanding person. He means you're a whole person and you can't be divided up into little parts, right? Some of which you wouldn't recognize as being you. So if someone asks you to do something that's ethical, very, very quickly, do I have time to get into this? Okay, so his thought experiment is this, if you don't know it. His thought experiment is you're on a vacation, you go for a walk, you come upon a sheriff holding 10 locals at gunpoint. And the sheriff says to you, oh, hello, nice to see you. So what we do here in this town is every once in a while, every month or so, we pull 10 random people out of the town and I kill them. And that's how I maintain law and order. I just let them know who's boss by just killing 10 people at random. But since you're here, this is a special occasion, and I will give you the gun, and you can just kill one person, and that will be our law and order lesson for the day. And the question is, should you do it? So if you're a utilitarian, you might say, well, one person dying is better than 10 people dying, so I guess I should do this. And what Bernard Williams says is, that's absurd. The question isn't whether it is right for someone to do this. The question is whether it's right for you to do it. And you are a person with integrity. You have a set of beliefs, of core principles. One of those core principles is don't shoot random people for no reason when you're on vacation. And so if you do it, the utilitarian argument falls to pieces because after you do this, you're going to go back to your bed and breakfast and sit with the fact that you just killed someone, which is not okay in your worldview. So what he believes is we have integrity, we have a sense of completeness, of wholeness, of a set of principles and values to which we adhere, and it is not okay for any theory, no matter how well-intentioned, to try to cut a little chunk out of our souls and say, but sometimes it's okay to murder people, right? So I think what he would say, at least, is you do what you think is ethical. If you are a thoughtful person and you've put the time in and the energy to conceiving of the right action in this situation, I think you do what you think is ethical, and if the world says that's not ethical or you did something wrong, then you say, bring it on. Let's come to the Carnegie Center and have a debate about this and see who's right. But I don't think that you should, I think I agree with him. I don't think you should violate a core principle or a core belief of yours simply because popular opinion or universal systemic belief of the nation you're in or the town you're in or anything else says, oh, here we believe this. If you believe something different, I think you stick to your guns. No pun intended. I didn't realize that I was about to.
Well, that's great. We're at the end of the hour, so I'm going to have to conclude this. But one of the great things about Carnegie Council for Ethics and International Affairs is this is what we do. We do this all the time and in an iterative fashion. So I hope we'll be able to engage you more in the future and continue this discussion. But thank you so much for showing us the applied nature of ethics, how ethics can really be something positive in our lives and something that we can do, and we can do it with real humanity and humor, and that there's something deeply life-affirming about what we're doing right here, right now. So, Michael, thank you for the book, thank you for coming, thank you for all you do, and we're adjourned.
My pleasure.